Oh, oh, that is pretty interesting. Oh, I didn't know that's how that worked. Oh, so he's like that dude from the Matrix, right? He's Mr. Anderson, ain't he? Oh man, I don't think I can use this car anymore. This car is cursed. There's literally a curse on this car. Yeah, I gotta drive this back. Cyberpunk 2077 was one of the most overhyped games of the decade, and while CD Projekt Red had an insanely large team to make the game, and the amount of money spent on marketing the game was just as large, it didn't have the best launch in 2020 due to it being unplayable with countless bugs. Now, 2 years later, the game has had some updates, bug fixes, and even an entire 10-episode anime made to remarket the game. Personally, I don't like to get on hype trains because they set expectations way too high to become disappointed. So I waited until recently to pick up the game to see if it was actually that bad. As you can see from the first clip, there still are bugs in the game, and they definitely seem to appear more often towards the later stages of the game, but it wasn't as bad as I heard it was at launch. Now let's just say that this is more of a reason to not pre-order games until you know exactly what the product will be like. But now that it's in a playable state, I've gone through the entire game to give a full and honest review of the game in its current state. There will also be an expansion to the game, but that isn't out currently, so I won't be covering that. I know some of the issues with the game can be solved with mods, but I won't be covering mods because I believe you should play the game through the first time with the original experience. So let's start out with what I think is the best part of Cyberpunk 2077, and it's the immersive world. It takes place in the Californian Night City, which is a technologically advanced dystopia where capitalism is fully unleashed. The city is more or less run by a few corporations which develop weaponry and technology. Unsurprisingly, when capitalism reigns supreme and sex sells, advertisements featuring nudity and mature clubs are going to be commonplace. If you aren't comfortable with this much sexualization, then you'll want to go to the options and turn off nudity, because the game is very graphic. It isn't one of those games where you fire it up to relax to. It's very intense, but very immersive. I swear I'm not looking. Trust me, I'm not
Dex had a
looking.
load to say about you. Called you professional, effective, and trustworthy. I hope he wasn't overselling.
You got me.
While the rich live in high rises in luxury, the rest of the city lives in poverty in the streets where they spend much of their free time escaping into virtual reality worlds or trying to make ends meet by either doing the dirty deeds that the corporates aren't willing to do, or the poor try to break the system, bypass laws, or form alliances to get to the top. Unfortunately, if you don't end up selling your soul to the devil, most people pay the ultimate price in their pursuit of fame or money. One common theme throughout the game is the interaction of human and robot, because people go around implanting gadgets into their bodies to give them superhuman strength, mobility, or cyber hacking capabilities. But these come at a cost. One of the most extreme examples of this is cyberpsychosis, which supposedly causes people to become unhinged by the amount of metal implanted in their bodies. There's an entire quest chain revolving around these cyber psychos and figuring out their motives to potentially come up with a cure. But there are some characters who eventually become more robot than human, and they don't go insane because they have lofty job positions to keep them satisfied. What really makes people go insane are all of the injustices and traumatic experiences in this corrupted society, suggesting that the human part is what makes them go mad. But that isn't really their fault. Calling them cyber psychos is just a way for the big corporations to find a scapegoat for abusing the city's people for wealth, and then leaving their dried up husks to fend for themselves.
I'm not going back! Hear me? Never! Try to take me and I'll crush you!
Let's see who crushes who.
Oh shit, he's crushing me. He's wrecking me. Come on, man, your move. Your move. Dude, he's pinching me against the wall. No, dude, destroy. As far as the story, you can choose between 3 different backgrounds that give you a different opening and some different dialogue options, but generally they end up in the same place. There is the nomad, which are the people who live on the outskirts of the desert, not buying into the city life, the street rats who struggle to make a living, and the corpos who are the big businessmen that have a hold on the powerful markets and industries. Regardless of which path you take, they all converge rather quickly, but there are many details within the story that you can affect. For example, if you choose to not kill a specific character, then they appear later in the story, which results in another character dying. Or if you do all of the quests for a particular character, then options will open up later for them to help you. The story revolves around an event that happened 50 years before the events of the current game, when Johnny Silverhand bombed a tower of one of the biggest corporations in Night City, Arasaka headquarters. While his story is interesting, it feels like the story focuses too much on the past events. Also, the story is a majority of sitting there listening to dialogue, and while the characters' movements and facial expressions are very realistic during dialogue to make you feel like you're in the moment, there will still be long stretches of time where you are just sitting there and choosing dialogue options. And while there are many different ways to play, which we'll go over in a bit, I think many players will find they don't have much motivation to start a second playthrough because of all the dialogue, which, although it is skippable, you'll want to pay attention to because it can affect how your playthrough pans out. Second playthroughs will need a lot of motivation to start again. Now that I've got all the things I've disliked about the story out of the way, I have to admit that it is one of the most meaningful video game stories I've ever experienced. All the characters you meet have their own motivations and stories that occur even when you aren't directly participating in them. You make hard decisions all the time because one character wants you to do something, but another character wants you to do another conflicting thing. Since these characters are really developed, you care about what happens to them, and the consequences of your actions have a deep impact. You really get to define who you are as the main character, and at the end of the day, you realize that as one person, you can't change the world, so finding what is meaningful to you is more important. In terms of actual gameplay, there are 3 main ways you can play through the game. There's the direct route, where you play like a first-person shooter and level up your guns and combat abilities, and alert the enemy while you fight to your objective. Then there's the hacker method, where you open new paths, or jam enemy technology using your scanner to avoid or give you advantages in combat. Then there's the stealth method, where you try to find back doors or windows to climb through to avoid being seen, and either reach your objective without engaging enemies, or by killing every enemy systematically from stealth. I played the game on hard mode, which was the second to highest difficulty, and had a ninja cowboy type build, where I used a knife to kill enemies in one shot from stealth, and then used pistols and katanas when I would get caught. On harder difficulties, you can't just stick to one of these playstyles and have to adapt to the situation. Sometimes there are too many enemies to just blast your way through, and sometimes you don't have enough time to patiently sneak by, and maybe you don't have enough RAM to hack enough machines to solve a situation. This provides a good amount of diversity to every hostile situation, even though most of these scenarios can be rather cookie cutter. And like I said with the story, a second playthrough is a lot of effort going through all the dialogue, so you may want to adopt a more hybrid playstyle the first time, or at least try out all the different weapon types, implants, and playstyles at some point. Now here's another big issue. The level scaling in the game is way off balance, so as you level up and get new items, you're getting much stronger, but so are the enemies. That keeps the game relatively balanced as long as you stick to the quests around the area your main quest is taking you. But if you want to actually explore the city, you'll sometimes meet enemies that are much higher level than you, and you'll do no damage to them, and they'll instantly kill you. There's such an immersive and beautiful city to explore, but the game makes you feel like you shouldn't be here a lot of the time if you try to explore too far. And when you return to the beginning areas, which you must do a lot of the time, the enemies there will just flop over instantly because now you're way higher level than them. It seems like the only way to play the game is by following the quest lines you have access to, and even then it feels limiting. So even if you want to do another playthrough of the game, you'd have less freedom with how you can go through it. To me, that really spoils the replayability of the game, but on your first playthrough, it will definitely provide you stunning visuals, meaningful ways to express and develop your character, and without spoiling too much, the story will have an impact on how you view the real world that you live in. Overall, I would give the game an 8.5 out of 10. It's definitely a game I suggest everyone plays at least once. The story and world is one of the best, and I got extremely immersed and addicted to it for a while, but the more I played, the more I realized it's missing out on a lot of game design that makes you want to play the game a different way. When new content gets introduced to the game, it'll be great to return to, but unless you're heavily into modding, the replayability just isn't there. So if you're considering picking up the game for the first time, I suggest you do. But if you want to return to the game since your first playthrough when the game launched, maybe you won't enjoy it as much. Then again, that's just my opinion, but hopefully it can help inform you so you can make your own choices, because in Night City, you can't trust anybody but yourself. If you like this content and want more, remember to subscribe, and I will see you all next time.